Behavior change. So how many of you have ever tried to change your own behavior? You have to fess up here. Whether it's eating healthier food, stopping smoking, sleeping more is always high on that list. Changing behavior is a uniquely human experience. But as we all know, it is not easy. Deep at the heart of so much systemic change is persuading and educating people on the longer-term benefits of changing their minds into actions. How can deeply rooted but harmful behaviors be changed at the individual, group, or systemic levels? I am a huge fan of Dr. Atul Gawande, and we had the great pleasure of spending some time with him during the Skoll World Forum this past April. Both a visionary and a practitioner, he was able to marry both the mundane and perhaps even unsexy idea of a 5-point checklist in hospitals for physicians and staff with a much higher purpose of decreasing infections in patients, which it did, saving more than 1,500 lives in ICUs in the state of Michigan within a year and a half alone. And that was almost a decade ago, before this checklist went nationwide. Imagine the lives saved by now. Staff and physicians were reticent to change until the evidence was clear and the new way was inevitable. It takes courage to lead people through change. It takes heart and it takes intellect. It takes an understanding of the current status quo to be able to change it into a new, more improved state of living and being. And in a moment, we'll hear from some very brave individuals moving the status quo into very different contexts. One is how people cook food in the developing world, and the second is how corporations evolve within all their unique constraints. But first, I have the pleasure of introducing Grammy Award-nominated Orode Doherty, Ambassador for the Global Alliance of Clean Cookstoves, followed by a discussion with 4 experts on cooking, behavior change, and the developing world. Let's watch some of Rocky's work while the stage gets more set.
It's too late, none of them can stop us now.
Rocky is one of those people who refuses to be silent, whose music contains a vital message that is more necessary now in these troublous times than ever before.
Whoa, whoa. Yeah, yeah. Whoa, na, 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 na.
The musical stage is really an opportunity to really create a conversation and nurture a certain sense of community. Whenever I get on stage, I try to let everybody understand the importance that, you know, we are all very fortunate to share this world together, and everybody also understand their responsibility not only to themselves but to their other men and also to the earth.
It's me again.
And I try to communicate that through the music, through the dance, and then through the messages.
In my country, Ghana, you know, school kids like you every day have to travel hours and hours just to get to school. Bikes can actually change this. This is a public health issue. A lot of women, a lot of children die from just cooking with solid fuels.
My music, to some extent, is almost like a ministry without being overtly preachy. You know, it's about trying to ignite the best in all of us.
Thank you. Thank you. How you all doing? Please, can we stand up? Are you ready, everybody? Yes, let's stand up. It's about, music is about inspiration, and today we are all here, and we are all, you know, bringing about new ideas, connecting to each other, and then when we leave here, we're gonna go into our own spaces where we can ignite these ideas. So what I'm gonna do here is for us to share a time of connectivity. Are you ready to sing with me? Yes. All right. All right, everybody. Let me hear you say hot, hot. Everybody got to say it hot, hot. Come on, let's sing it hot, hot. Everybody, let's hear it hot, hot. African tree land, now dance all rula. Whoa, yo, 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 yo. Everything we go do be hot, hot. African tree land, now dance all rula. Whoa, yo, 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 yo. Everything we go do. It's be musical campaign. We go hit you without pain. Some of you go they complain, but they dance all keep on moving. So my people not go be long before the week can go make strong. Now you know say nothing be wrong to move to this tempo all night long. Now liberation music. We go to rock, 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 rock with new foundation. Boom, boom for everywhere. Whoa, whoa, na na na. Mama shake it till it go to be hot, hot. Mama shake it till it go to be. Mama shake it till it go dead. Mama shake it till it go dead. African thriller, now dance or ruler. Oh yo, 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 yo. Everything we go do be hot, hot. African thriller, now champion ruler. Oh yo, 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 yo. Everything we go do be hot, hot. Now you know I got them moves to supply you with a groove. The rhythm go control. So my people gather around, feel this excitement from head to toe. Everybody, open your eyes. Now this the time where we for do so. Now this sweet sensation, boom, boom, forever. We go to rock, 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 rock with new foundation. Boom, boom, for everywhere. Whoa, whoa, na 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 na. Mama shake it till it go Debbie. 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 African thriller, now dance or ruler. Oh yo, 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 yo. Everything we go do be hot, hot. African thriller, now champion ruler. Oh yo, 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 yo. Everything we go do be hot, hot. Come on, let me hear you say. Everybody, let's sing it. The temperature is getting. Everybody gotta feel it. Come on, let's feel it. Everybody, let's do it. Come on, let's sing it. Everybody, let's do it. Come on, let's sing it. It's getting hotter. Come on, let's feel it. Thank you, people. Can I get more in my monitors, please? Yes, music is our inspiration, you know. Music lifts all of us. You know, let's stand up. I know that when I'm done, we can all sit down, you know. Are you ready to shine a light, people? All right. Whoa, whoa. Whoa, whoa. Every day, in every way, oh, I'm gonna let my whole light shine. Every day, in every way, oh, I'm gonna let my whole light shine. On and on and on and on, for the world to see. Yeah, yeah. Oh, people, I am ready. Chapter new beginning. When every little step I take will reach for a higher ground. It's not gonna be easy. Fate will let it be. And I know with you by my side, it's all gonna be alright. I'll say, hey, I believe we can shine a light so bright, so right. I say, hey, I believe we can shine a light so bright, every day, in every way. Oh, I'm gonna let my whole light shine. Come on, people, sing it with me. Every day, in every way. Oh, I'm gonna let my whole light shine. On and on and on and on, for the world to see. Whoa, whoa. Light up the darkness with the positive spirit. Oh, let the sun shine in with the wave of a joyful sound. Whether high or low, I will not be afraid to lift my head up, reach and touch the sky. I'll sing, hey, I believe we can shine a light so bright, so right. I say, hey, I believe we can shine a light so bright, so right. Now let me hear you all say it. Whoa, whoa. Whoa, whoa. Yeah, I believe we can shine a light so bright for the world to see. Whoa, 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 whoa. Hey, I believe we can shine a light so bright all over the world, all over the world. Let me hear you sing with me. No matter who you are, no matter who you are, I want to hear you sing it now. Hey, I believe we can shine a light so bright. I want to hear you sing louder, louder. Let me hear you sing. Whoa, whoa, hey, I believe we can shine a light so bright. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, everybody sing. Whoa! Yeah, it's coming. Let me hear you say, hey, I believe we can shine a light so bright. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, everybody say it. All around the world. Come on, let me hear you clap. Hey, I believe we can shine a light so bright. Believe it, people. We're going to be the change. So let me hear you sing it loud again. All around the world, I believe in you, you believe in me, we'll sing. One more time, louder, let me hear you say. Thank you so much. You know, we are that change. And don't believe anything else, you know. We can make everything and anything possible. This next song is called Rock Your Soul. You can sit down. Whoa, 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 yeah. I say so. Rock your soul, baby. You know one day you're gonna be a star, baby. You know all I wanna do is rock your soul. Some may claim I'm just a ghetto superstar.
and the pettiness of jealousy. Yeah, and love will lead us every way, for one day all will fade away. We do that right, we should be okay. I'll say, baby, you know one day you're gonna be a star. Baby, you know all I wanna do is rock your soul. Some will say I'm a so-far superstar. Baby, you know all I wanna do is rock your soul. For time will reveal every hidden character. In the end, none of that will matter. Following the words of the Holy Master. When we are true, girl, breaks us through, girl. It takes two, girl. Me and you, yeah. Baby, you know one day you're gonna be a star. Baby, you know all I wanna do is rock your soul. They will say, I wanna rock. I wanna rock your soul. I wanna rock so your soul, your soul will sing. So rock your soul. Let me see your hands in the air, people. So your hands in the air. So rock your soul. Let me hear you say, so rock. I wanna rock. I wanna rock you so every day and night. I wanna love you so. I wanna rock you so every day and night. I wanna love you so. Let's sing it together, people, now. So rock your soul. I wanna rock every day and night. I wanna love you so. I wanna rock. Whoa. Now everybody on their feet. We're almost done now. Let me see your hands in the air. So rock your soul. God bless you all. Let's make it happen. Change.
We live in an era of technological wonder. Living cities of glass and steel synchronize as we imagined the future to be. We've put a man on the moon, invented cars that can drive themselves. We're connected 24/7. But even with such incredible advances, we've yet to overcome one of the world's most pressing health and environmental issues that affects 3 billion people globally. The simple act of cooking, which unites and nourishes our families, happens also to pose one of the world's greatest challenges. Exposure to cooking smoke prematurely kills more than 4 million people globally.
Please have the panelists join us here. That was quite a way to kick off the session with incredibly positive energy, and it's so appropriate as we're going to talk about cooking energy in this session, and also appropriate that it's a post-lunch session, so it's all coming together for us here. Probably most of you didn't think about how your food was cooked when you had lunch earlier, but today we're going to delve a little bit into that in this session as we talk about the preparation of food, especially in the developing world. So I'm joined here by fellow panelists. Thank you, Rocky, for that inspiring performance.
Thank you, people. Thank you. Thank you.
We'll give Rocky a few minutes to catch his breath here before we start and talk a little bit with our panelists. But as you just heard from the video, there are about 3 billion people around the world who are dependent on food that is cooked over open fires or very traditional stoves. And this causes millions of deaths annually, so not in total, but millions of deaths every year due to this prolonged exposure to cook stove smoke. There's just significant emissions that harm the environment, accelerate climate change, and women can spend up to 5 hours a day in the process of collecting the fuel and cooking. So it really doesn't allow them to engage as much within their economies. So today and this week has been all about the Sustainable Development Goals. How do we be transformative? How do we accelerate change? If the Sustainable Development Goals are truly not going to leave anyone behind, we have to address this issue of clean cooking. If we're looking to ensure a world where growth is sustainable for our planet, we have to address the issue of clean cooking. If we are to engage women inclusively and equitably in all of our societies and our productive engagement, we have to address this issue of cooking. So it's an issue that cannot be ignored and is central and core to almost all of the SDGs. So what's the solution to this? Is it about giving away stoves free of charge to those who don't have it? No, the answer to that isn't. In fact, our colleague from Myanmar talked about that earlier this morning. When you give away something that's free, people don't value it, they don't fully understand its use. And you're not really starting with where we think you should start, which is with the user, with the consumer. So what we and about 1,700 of partners over the last several years have been doing is to really develop a market for clean cooking solutions in the developing world. And what do we mean by that? The idea here is really to start with the user, the consumer, not to view them as a beneficiary or a passive recipient, but someone that's active in the process. So start with the user, understand their needs, understand how they cook, understand the fuel that's available to them. Start with that and then provide options through innovation and technology that give them the choices. So again, don't make a decision on behalf of the user, but provide them with options and choices so they can decide what best meets their needs. Then be able to provide payment solutions. We hear a lot coming out of Africa in particular of pay-as-you-go solutions, so people can buy what used to be very expensive fuel, in the form of electricity and gas, but they pay for it in small increments. And the same is with these clean cook stoves as well. So these are the different types of things that about 1,700 partners around the world are engaged in ensuring that there's a market for clean cooking solutions. But if we are truly to be able to get people to change their behavior and use these stoves and fuels, the whole issue of raising awareness and behavior change becomes such a significant part of the equation. So yes, we've done all the work in providing those choices and technologies and options, but now it comes down to the user and how to make them aware of why they should transition from the way they've been cooking to this cleaner, more efficient way of doing so, and ensuring that they do that for all of their needs as opposed to just a portion of their cooking needs. So it's a real pleasure today to be joined with three experts in this space. So we've got Kate, who is the co-founder and producer of a Mediae company based doing a lot of edutainment and development work in sub-Saharan Africa. And she's going to talk in particular about a new approach that they've taken through edutainment over the last few years and how they've applied that to the clean cooking sector. Then we've got Orode, who is the country director for Africare in Nigeria. And Africare has been very focused over the decades really in looking at development and very inclusive development on the continent. And of course, Rocky, you've all met our proud ambassador for the Global Alliance for Clean Cooking, who's really using his voice in so many different ways to be able to create awareness from the household level all the way up to policy levels to be able to facilitate change. So first, Kate, I'd like to start with you to talk a little bit about just this idea of edutainment, you know, and how you've sort of applied that in the clean cooking space as well.
Well, we come from a perspective which believes very, very strongly in entertaining our audiences. That if you don't entertain your audience, you will lose your audience. And in Kenya, I guess about 20, 25 years ago, you suddenly started having to pay for media space. So if you weren't going to actually get big audiences, you weren't going to get the advertisers on board. And that would mean that you wouldn't get on air. So we had to start looking at ways in which we could get big audiences. And the way to do that was to entertain them. And we've done that through a variety of different mediums, drama being one. But the one that we've developed for Clean Cookstoves is a sister program to a really successful program we launched about 5 years ago, I guess now, called Shamba Shape Up. Shamba being in Kenya the word for smallholding, farm. And Shamba Shape Up goes to different farmers each week throughout Kenya, talks to both the women and the men about what constraints they face on farm, and then we show and work with them on implementing improved ways of doing things, techniques and technologies both, but affordable and doable. So that's taken off big time, and we've got about 4 million viewers for that. It's in Kiswahili and in English. And on the back of that, we've launched Shamba Chef, which is the program we're going to see a little clip of in a minute, which is targeted very much at women. Again, goes around different parts of Kenya, meeting women, finding out what their constraints are when it comes to cooking, and what it is that they know about cookstoves and the constraints that they face. Also, there's quite a strong nutrition component, which works really well with the cooking, the cookstoves. So it's very entertaining. It's got celebrity chefs from Kenya. It's got cook-off competitions. It's lively, engaging. We've got two very good presenters who are good fun. So it's very much women talking to other women viewers about why these gadgets work for them and what it brings to them to enhance their livelihoods. So perhaps, should we have a little
Let's take
look?
a peek.
Welcome to Shamba Chef. In this series, we delve into the most traditional of African cultures, food.
Traveling across Kenya to find out what we eat, where we get it, and how we cook it.
We explore new ways to cook, make it quicker, safer, cleaner, and at half the cost.
We meet families, enter their homes, and find out what happens in Kenyan kitchens.
Learning, giving advice, transforming kitchens, and most importantly, enjoying food.
So Mama, this is your kitchen. This is where all the cooking happens.
Yes. This place is quite smoky, and especially for Mama George in her condition, plus the kids also coming in here in all this smoke.
So I'm going to introduce her to a modern firewood jiko. How much do you spend on buying firewood per month?
I use 1,300 per month.
That's a lot of money. The good thing is that with Kuniokoa, you'll be able to save 55% of that cost. So it means in a month, you're able to save roughly 700 shillings.
You're just in time to see our contestant.
Lighting up their jikos and get going.
Honest, what do you think about the Kunyokoa stove?
It is very good. It's very economical. The heat is sufficient, and I really like it.
The winner for today is... Mama Lucy. Mama Lucy made the most delicious and nutritious meal and won a fantastic Kunyokoa stove.
She was so excited. I hope the stove has helped her.
And if you at home would like to win one of these fantastic stoves, SMS iChef. See you next time.
When we travel to another Kenyan kitchen right here on
Shamba Chef.
That's good. Sorry, shall I?
Yeah.
So that I should explain. It's on broadcast in English and in Kiswahili, which obviously a lot of farmers speak in the rural areas. And in fact, that clip is taken from episode 1, which we launched on Sunday, like the day before yesterday, kind of thing. And we got 1.8 million viewers, which is really. We're very excited about it. Yeah.
And it was, just to put that number in perspective, when we were speaking, you said that was the #1 show in its time slot Sunday evening in Kenya.
Yes, it was.
So
the next one down was KTN, I think, and that was half of what we got.
Yeah,
so,
that's
yeah,
great.
yeah.
Well, you know, looking at that clip, it does show several different elements. So there's a competitive element, there's a woman talking to women and sort of engaging in conversation. There's the time and budget savings that comes from using a more efficient stove. How did you go about devising the content and determining sort of what elements to put in the show? And it's a series, correct?
It is. It's a 13-part series, and that's just the first series. We hope it'll run like Shamba did. And continues to do. How do we find out? We do quite a lot of formative research where we talk to women about what it is they're wanting to, what the constraints are that they're facing. And so often it's not what kind of we think they will be. It's so important, I think, to actually find out. So things like, obviously cost is an issue, but also an interesting finding was the speed with which food can be prepared. So people often have more than one stove so there are kind of nuances that we wouldn't know if we didn't go and talk to women. I think also it's about kind of hearing it from them. So there is the show, the TV show, but we also make it into as much of a two-way communication as we can, partly by having women on the program talking to other women, but also we invite people, you might have seen at the end of that, where we invite people to text in if they want more information or if they've got questions or if they want to be referred to one of the manufacturers. So we feature 3 main manufacturers in the programs, and they of course also feed in their content because they're really knowledgeable. And also ministry, actually. We got Ministry of Health and Ministry of Ag, and
It ties nicely to the sessions this morning where we talked about being proximate, you know, and really understanding what the issues are, hearing from the users directly to be able to shape some of the content. So thank you for that. Orode, coming to you, how do you take, and there's something similar in Nigeria that's taking place now in terms of, you know, accessing, in that case, LPG gas for cooking. How would you take sort of this category building, large-scale television, radio sort of programs and translate that to behavior change at the household level?
So thank you. It's very nice to watch. In Nigeria, our challenge has been a little different. So our focus has been on LPG, which is liquefied petroleum gas, and getting women to actually switch from the dominant dirty fuels that we use now, which in some cases is firewood, in some cases is charcoal or kerosene, and getting them to switch to LPG. But there's a perception in Nigeria, a misperception, that LPG is for the wealthy. And this perception, unfortunately, is prevalent not only among people in lower socioeconomic classes, but also even among the wealthy themselves. So you hear people say, well, they can't afford it. And on some level, they are correct in the sense that the switchover cost is pretty high. It's $27 now that it's come down from what used to be about $70 because we've now responded to the people, some of that earlier research, which happened over the past decade to now get people to start thinking about manufacturing small single burner stoves for LPG. So at the level of the household, what we've then, in talking with women, one of the things that came across very clearly was the concern about the limitation on cost, but also about fear. And so we also had to go into communities and settle down with people and ask, what are the issues you face? How can we help you solve them? And cost and fear translate also into what people term as landlords who won't permit LPG in their buildings. And so we have to address that as an issue as well. So it's really about sitting with the people, identifying what their individual concerns are, getting people who are from the community with whom they can identify, who speak the various languages that they do, to go from house to house in pairs, using tools that have been developed as a result of a lot of communication with them. And so one of the things that's showing up there now is gas stove safety tips, because we found that sitting right next to cost, fear was the greatest other concern that made people not switch. And so when you take cost and fear out of the way, then people say, okay, we're interested, and they actually move along the behavior change continuum into embracing and then becoming confident about entering into cook-offs in the community, and then actually becoming advocates for LPG. So getting people into the homes of women, getting women into the homes of women, having conversations with them, showing them how to access credits, showing them how to go into their normal village savings and loans associations or their cooperatives to draw down on those when it's their turn, and then getting them to overcome fear by actually demonstrating cooking with them in their homes and showing them how to maintain an LPG stove safely.
You know, you were also talking earlier about how cooking is an enabler. So it's not really an end unto itself, but it helps women to engage in so many other things. So can you talk a little bit more about that and what you're seeing as women transition to cleaner stoves?
So one of the things that we found, and we've been in this space for a few years now, but we've only started to implement directly and watching the women move along this continuum just in this year. And one of the very interesting things has been that it's given women permission to engage around household finances a little more constructively. So because they are buying an appliance that's a little expensive compared to what they would normally be thinking about themselves doing, they're also starting to ask the other questions about, what else could I be making decisions around that I've sort of not allowed myself to take the permission to do. And I think why that's important is because beyond cooking, which is seen as your domain and which you hadn't taken over completely before, you now start to see the other areas where, yeah, it's your domain, and you might want to step out into that area. So empowerment around decision making, getting people to speak up a little more in public places around what it is that we do, why we do what we do, the decision I took to purchase a cook stove, talking to other women and helping them also take charge of their lives. So making decisions around childcare, making decisions around schooling, whatever it is, the other decisions they could be making for their children, those things are starting to happen. And, you know, we thought this was about cook stoves and about the decisions made in the kitchen. But we're finding that these are about empowering women to have a voice and then stepping out in the community and saying, we made this decision to do this or that or the other. So it's empowering for me too.
Yeah. No, and I think it's also what we hear is the time that women get back. You know, it's more efficient cooking. You've got more time to do other things as well.
To do the other things that are also important to you, because they don't like to hear that cooking spends a lot of their time because they think that's part of what they're supposed to be doing with their time. But engaging around the other things that they could be doing as well while they cook or when they reduce the amount of time they spend on cooking.
Great, thank you. We'll look forward to seeing how the campaigns roll out and what the impact is. Rocky, I hope you've gotten your breath back here. We've been privileged to have you as an ambassador for a few years, and I've seen you work both at the grassroots level, at the household level, but also at the national and international levels, where behavior change takes a different form, getting governments to understand the need to integrate this issue, which has not been on the radar for many of them for several years. years, centrally on their development agendas. So can you talk a little bit about some of your experiences there and the behavior change that has to take place at multiple levels?
Well, I mean, their issue of cooking, people have been cooking on open fires for, a long time. And most of us come from, if you're connected to a traditional home, you probably have seen that, happening. And for me, I recognize also from earlier on that clean cooking, being able to, scale that and have people have access to cleaner ways of cooking had so many benefits. But at the same time, too, you're going to be challenging stereotypes, which is in terms of traditional way of cooking and changing ingrained cultural practices. So it required being empathetic and understanding the cultural context, and at the same time using that as a means to engage. And once you engage, you're able to know the angles in which you can be able to, approach people and be able to spur eventual behavioral change and then eventual adoption, And so, through my travels, I was actually also very privileged to be involved in when we were doing the National Country Action Plan for Ghana. And I remember, a lot of our leaders who had seen me in the newspapers, talking about this issue. I mean, first of all, their interest was piqued because they were like, okay, cooking, and then you as a musician. So where is the intersection? And I try to communicate to them, first of all, that the concept, first, there's a public health concept, and outside of that too was the social entrepreneurship aspect of it. Because most of our policymakers are constantly trying to see how we can be able to empower people from the bottom up. And the cooking model, first of all, addressed, that issue because along the value chain, you had women empowerment, and you also had ability to empower young entrepreneurs, and women also being an integral part of that. So in doing so, too, you're strengthening the household. You're also making overtures in terms of being able to alleviate poverty, because when people are empowered, first of all, savings in time, it's savings in money. Having efficient burning cookstoves, you're dealing with environmental issues, and even on a bigger scale for the governments, who are talking about climate change, I also communicated to, I remember one time with our, a chief of staff of our former president, who asked me pointedly, and I was telling him that, Cookstoves was almost like collecting everybody and having them take action in terms of climate change. Because once you put that into people's hands, first of all, the carbon and also methane and black carbon, which were contributing to climate change, you were dealing with that and turning everybody who is doing this adoption into an active participant in mitigating climate change. So for the policymakers, all of a sudden, that started making sense to them, and I think that, obviously changing, ancient, old behaviors and ways of doing things is not really, it provides a lot of challenge. But I feel that once we're able to let people see that this is also something that can spur development on so many different dimensions. I even one time told, that iPhones, disrupted communication and phones. And I feel that one of the biggest open markets that is waiting for disruption is the cookstove market. So I felt that that should be something that our country should foresee, and be one of the first people to really step in and be part of the alliance and be able to take advantage of this economic opportunity.
And certainly Ghana has done that with Ghana as one of the countries through Rocky's leadership that included clean cooking in their climate action plans that were presented in Paris. So we actually, through that example, we have another 49, 50 countries that included it. So certainly impact at the policy level has been achieved, and it's voices like yours that allow for the door to be open for the rest of the more technical grassroots folks to sort of walk through down the path. So it's an important
and I also see it more in terms of investors too, like in terms of the global community, that this is an opportunity for spurring social enterprise really across the globe, and also a primary thing to fight poverty.
Right. So we're running a little low on time here, but I just want to give 30 seconds each to both Kate and Orode. Talk a little bit about impact. How do you measure impact? How do we ensure that what we're doing is working? Because clearly we've got a long road ahead, and we need to make sure we're replicating things that are working and not necessarily those that aren't.
Shall I start?
Sure, please.
Okay. We do quite a lot of research around all of our programming, and the way we divide it is knowledge, attitude, and practice. That's our kind of. So we go in before we broadcast, and then we do a similar study after we've broadcasted. So, and we also do qualitative focus groups and that kind of thing. And we've done that around all of our shows. Shamba Shape Up's been very interesting in terms of, I think it's 80% change knowledge and 43% practice. I mean, it's hard to measure. You know, it's stated change, but anyway, it's an indication. And then every now and again, we don't commission it, but our funders commission big quantitative studies, which I think on Shamba Shape Up, it was something like $25 million of milk production extra from watching the show. So the cost of doing that study, we could have done a whole series, but you have to do it.
You have to have
really.
the impact. You need to understand it to be able to know where to invest, you know, in the future.
Right.
I think similar to Kate, as we started, we're taking all the data basically from the women on what it is that they're starting with, how they're reacting, and then as time goes on, we continue to measure that data. Now, the data is a lot of data to collect, and to track behavior is hard, but it's necessary in order for us to know where the biggest bang is for our buck. Our funders also will be commissioning post our community interventions, going back into the homes and measuring after we've seen the women who switched what it is, whether they're actually using those new Cookstoves. But we're also following very carefully and ensuring that if they're not using them, we understand why they're not using them. The idea being that we recognize that behavior change is slow, but it can make an important difference. And if we don't achieve that, then it doesn't really matter how many jingles there are out there. If communication is not complete when we sit with you one-on-one, then there's probably a deeper reason for it. So we're looking forward to post community intervention impact assessments, and hopefully they'll come out really. Yes.
You know, we talked about 3 billion households, so that's roughly 500 million plus households around the world that are still in need of cleaner, more efficient cooking solutions. So through the efforts of many partners, the partners here and the champions here on the panel, we're able to make some headway. We're about 60 million strong now, but there's still 400 plus to go. So we really do look at transformative approaches, very different ways of trying to truly disrupt, you know, and trying to achieve some of these outcomes in a fairly quick level. So the last word over to you before I turn it over for questions from the panel.
Well, I know that this room is full of, you know, people from the technological sector, finance sector, you know, from public health to development sectors. What I want to tell them is that if you don't know about the issue, just take the time to really educate yourself about it and know that, you know, we're probably sitting on, you know, one of the probably biggest business opportunity that is out there. And, you know, please go about, you know, tweet, you know, add, you know, the hashtag Cookstoves, and let's really try and uplift the bottom of the pyramid up, you know, and really empower people, empower women at the same time too, you know, working on the environment and, you know, uplifting everybody along the way.
Great. Thank you. Well, we have a few minutes left. Thank you very much. Any questions from the audience in the last couple minutes? Yes.
What's the biggest impediment that we could all think of something to do? As you said, we go back to our cubby hole, think about things. What should we do to help you be more successful?
Great. We'll turn it over to our panelists. Kate?
I think it goes back to talking to the people we're communicating in our game, and really understanding where they're coming from. I think as funders and donors and program makers, we come in with our own agenda very often, and I think it is communication.
I also think that, you know, unlike other issues that have, you know, so many champions around the world and people are aware of it. This issue requires a lot more voices and champions to keep amplifying it for people to become aware of it and also see the opportunity that comes with it. So I encourage everybody to, tell your friends, tweet about it, talk about it, find out about it, and that's all I could ask for.
For us, I think that for countries where LPG, for example, is abundantly available, it should be a matter of national course, that the advocacy there is that that should be the dominant fuel that's promoted at the level of government, by government, because governments actually promote different fuels for different reasons. So when there's an opportunity to advocate at the level of government, please by all means do so, and sort of to have your facts, and we have the facts and we can share them with you, and to ensure that they are also hearing, and that at every institution, whether it's a federal or a state or a local institution, the dominant mode of cooking should be using a clean cooking fuel alternative. I think that's really important.
So in addition to the few points that have been mentioned around awareness, championship, and policy change, the last thing I would add to that would be investment. This entire effort is built on the backs of social enterprises producing, distributing, financing cleaner and more efficient stoves and fuels. So these are enterprises that people can invest in. Development finance institutions can invest in. There will be a return to this as well. So Professor Yunus spoke earlier about social enterprises. The entire sector is built on social enterprises. It's a very different approach. So as we sit here in New York and we're listening to financing for development and the SDGs, this is one of those root cause issues, if invested in, will not only provide an individual rate of return, but provide a transformative rate of return because it affects 10 of the 17 SDGs directly. So if you're looking for a high rate of return on your investment across multiple areas, investing your funding in some of these enterprises is absolutely necessary as an engine of growth, and it will really result in significant change. Good. I think we are running out of time, so I'll close it. Thank you so much for your attention. Thank you to all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you for that very, very rich discussion. We're going to take a moment and shift gears into the business context. Soon we'll be joined by Mindy Lubber of Ceres and Dr. Mehmood from PepsiCo. They currently work together to untangle barriers and seize opportunities for business to take a leading role in the fight against climate change. But first, a short video showing the unique and powerful work of Mindy and Ceres.
The United States will withdraw from the Paris Climate Accord.
The business community has a strong reaction to the president's withdrawal from the Paris Agreement. Many prominent companies, including IBM, ExxonMobil, and Amazon, support the accord.
More than 24 companies, including oil giant Shell, Apple, Facebook.
General Electric CEO Jeff Immelt tweeted, quote, "Climate change is real. Industry must now lead and not depend on government."
It was just an enormous response of businesses saying, unlike 10 years ago, they're willing to step up to the plate, they're willing to be part of the solution, not part of the problem, and they're willing to act. This is not about good guys versus bad guys, East Coast versus West Coast, blue states versus green states. It is about whether or not we have enough jobs. It is about whether our industries stay strong. The agricultural industry can't be strong if climate keeps getting worse and storms are ruining their crops. The insurance industry will not stay strong if they're paying $40 billion in payouts on average a year for the property and casualty insurance sector because of climate-related increased storms. The clothing industry, who rely on the cotton crop, do not do well when the cotton crop dies due to droughts caused by climate change. What we found was not 10 companies or 20 companies, but 50 companies and then 100 companies, and we're now at 500 plus, who wanted to stand up and make the case that acting on climate was in their own self-interest as well as in the public interest. For us, it's bringing in some who people felt would be against climate regulation, who people felt in the past opposed climate regulation, but we're seeing quite the opposite, that businesses understand the need to act. They're starting to act, and from all the most unsuspecting places. And if Washington doesn't want to listen to environmental leaders or scientists, they will listen to the major corporate leaders and financial leaders when they call for change, and change now. Well, it ended. We are still in, and we are all still in on how to take on the issues of the Sustainable Development Goals. Today is about we are the future. It is about how we take on the problems addressed in the Sustainable Development Goals, how we take on boldly, innovatively, with a passion, with time constraints, the issues of climate change, of water shortages, the issue of poverty and not having enough food. The goals are very clear, some think so audacious that they can't be met. And what I will say is they probably can't be met by government alone, and they can't be met by one country, but they can be met and they must be met, given that we're talking about humanity and our future and what my kids' future looks like. They can be met if we bring people together, if we build the future in a different way. I'm going to introduce Mehmood Khan, who is a leader at PepsiCo, and ask him to talk about how corporate America, who 10 years ago we all might have said they are not in. They are not there to fight climate change, to fight water shortages, to deal with the waste issues, to deal with poverty issues and food problems. But 10 years later, I think that has changed. We're talking today about behavioral change. Let's ask Dr. Khan, what is it about corporate America today that's different than 10 years ago? And I don't mean to say there were not leaders like PepsiCo who 10 years ago were acting, but the amount of passion, the number of companies who see addressing the issues of the sustainability goals as their own goals, as well as some goals that the United Nations may perhaps care about. The change has been clear. Talk about behavioral change. This is a place to dig in, to look at, because it is clearly part of the solution. So what's brought the change? How do you look at things? We know how you look at building a company like PepsiCo, but you have engaged on the challenges that the Sustainable Development Goals address. How do you think about them, and what's in it for you?
I think right at the center of this whole climate discussion at the end of the day is the food supply and businesses in the food supply. Agriculture, food production, manufacturing, distribution. We're not going to touch, and we recognized this over a decade ago, we're not going to be able to address the global challenge of water, carbon, climate change without taking on the whole end-to-end of our food supply. Look, somewhere around 3/4 of freshwater use is agriculture on the planet. Somewhere around 70% of greenhouse gas production is in the generation of food. So no matter what you do in your home with your faucet or your shower or anything, until we touch this, that was going to be. So that was the first thing. Now the second is, how do you mobilize and why would you mobilize, right? Those are the questions. Consumers are better informed. They're asking for that transparency. Employees are our consumers. We have large workforces. And in this generation in particular, where we're actually have a challenge and we're competing for the best talent, young graduates coming out of school, they're asking, how am I going to be making a difference when I work in your organization? This, I mean, frankly, when I came out of school in the 80s, that wasn't the #1 question we were asking when we were jogging to 2017, these young graduates, they're asking, well, great, Dr. Khan, this is good, but tell me how I'm going to make a difference. Our employees are asking for it. Policymakers, directly or indirectly asking that question. NGOs are asking that question. So we live in a world, appropriately, where that's going to become a necessity. And over the last decade, there's been greater and greater alignment on what it is. Now, there's going to be differences in terms of how we might execute, and we'll get into that. But to me, that's done. What we really need to talk about is how. I have no question in my mind of the should we. We're past that. We're more than a decade past that. Now, everybody might not be there, but most, of the large corporations that I know of in our sector, they're there.
So you've taken a shot at setting goals around water, around human rights, around diversity, around climate change, around your waste, around how you deal with farmers and how you teach them. How audacious are those goals? I mean, we need big, bold solutions if we're going to meet some of the goals of the Sustainable Development Goals.
Well, let's think about how, as an industry and then within PepsiCo, how we've transformed this. And any reflection or criticism I might have, I have to say that 10 years ago when I joined the company, I was one of the leaders, their architect, was the architect in helping put those goals together. And now in this 2025 version, I actually chaired it. So as I look back, we've come in with 10 years of knowledge. Let me give you an example. We used to talk about how we're going to reduce our water use in our operating plants by X%. Great. It wasn't easy. We brought down our water use by 20-some%. And we knew we were the industry leader. Some of you might know in 2014, our team won the Stockholm Water Prize for being leaders. Okay? And everybody was celebrating. And then we're sitting back in our offices saying, well, yeah, but isn't going to cut it. Same with greenhouse gas. We said, let's cut our carbon emissions by 20% in our operations. Sounds great. In my office and the leadership, we actually weren't celebrating. It was industry leading, but the question was initially, how much can we reduce? And yet the question should have been, how much do we need to reduce in order to change the trajectory of our planet? That's a very different question. Because 90% of my industry's greenhouse gas footprint is actually outside our operations. So if you cut your operational impact by 20%, you're cutting 20% of 7%. Right? That doesn't move the needle. And so the question, when you ask about audacious, somebody asked me, well, your goal is now based on what? We're not the experts of this. We looked at the UN SDGs and said, well, if 2 degrees centigrade is the target, if we just accept that and stop debating it, and then we work back from that and say, not how much can we reduce, but what do we need to reduce by in order for PepsiCo's footprint to be brought down so we contribute our part of that 2 degree, but not stop there, of our systems footprint, which is scope 1, 2, and 3, which means take on that other 90%. And we can get into a bit, we were talking earlier about how, but until you commit to that other 90%, that otherwise is looked at as that's somebody else's problem. It's not. It's our collective problem. How do we change it?
Well, let's talk about that. You must have 10,000 growers or tens of thousands who are out there working for you, delivering goods and products. How do you control their water use, their carbon footprint, how they treat their workers, and what they're doing to make sure they get the most out of farming so we can eventually deal with the fact that people won't go hungry?
Great question, and we asked ourselves this question first about 5 years ago, and we set one of those crazy, audacious goals. When you're sitting in the C-suite, you sort of send out these memos and say, guys, this is what we've got to deliver on. That's easy because you don't have to do it. Your team has to do it. And that's the privilege of having gray hairs. So we said, what if we took a pilot, a reasonable size, commercial operating farms, and we actually picked our pilot to be in England, in the southeast of England where we have potato farms that grow potatoes for us. And we said, look, here's a few criteria. No more new inventions. So this is not a pilot to see if we can find new technology. I spent all my career as science. This is not about inventing anything. This is about taking what we already have and deploying it and learning how best to deploy it, number one. So I don't want an academic grant to study another research project. I used to do that, but move on. Second, let us set a goal that we're going to do, and this is sound crazy, but we said cut water use on those potato farms by 50% and cut greenhouse gas production by 50%. Sounds crazy. And then, here's the other clinch, yield on those farms per acre cannot go down. Because these farmers, at the end of the day, they're entrepreneurs, they're business people, they have livelihoods, and if you say, well, do this, but don't worry about your yield, it ain't going to work. So we set off and did that. But then we said, we can't measure the impact of this ourselves, so let's find a credible partner. So we went to the University of Cambridge in England, partnered with a technology company who could map and get all this, and then we deployed everything that we had available. Sensors, drip irrigation, the appropriate use of nitrogen, etc. Did everything that we knew how to do and did it. 5 years later, the end of 2016, we just released those results, first quarter of this year. Guess what happened? Water use went by half, carbon production went down by half, the yield didn't decline. We didn't invent a single new thing. We call that the Sustainable Farming Initiative. So now we're rolling and mapping out our supply chain of farmers on different crops. Our footprint is about 10 million acres around the world. We've already now, under the SFI, getting data from 1 million acres in over 15 countries. That's 5 years into the initiative. Our plan, and my hope is, that by 2025 we'll have mapped out at least 70% of that, 7 million acres, in over 30 countries, small and large. And partnered now, the data set is being housed in a division of the United Nations. And my ambition is that as we learn, these farmers looking at your question, how do you incentivize them? They don't work for us. They can grow for us today. They could choose to grow for my competitor tomorrow. It doesn't matter. But if we can show them best practices, two things will happen. If you show somebody a distribution curve and say, by the way, you are here, and Farmer Joe, your neighbor 4 acres down, is here in the same region, guess what they're going to do? They're entrepreneurs. They go, well, how do I get over to here? And nitrogen costs money. In many parts of the world, water costs money. These are input costs, so that's one. The second is that as we do this, we're hoping that we can interrogate this data set and truly find best practices for different crops, by different regions, across borders. This is borderless. This data set is accumulating, and I'm hoping universities will come to the table and say, we want to study this. We want to.
So when I listen to you, one would say, it just makes sense. Where are the blockages? Are there blockages at PepsiCo where somebody, investors, board members say, look, if it's not going to show up in quarterly earnings, we shouldn't be doing that? Or is it full speed ahead and do you have full buy-in, number one? And number two, how do we turbocharge? You know, I'll use a silly term, corporate America. It doesn't mean, but how do we make sure that others like you see the benefits, have the buy-in? We can't accomplish the Sustainable Development Goals, and they must be met. We must meet those goals without partnerships with the private sector.
So let me address your question in two aspects. There's the organizational, and then there's the external, right? Very quickly on the organizational, you know, when Indra Nooyi kicked this whole initiative off 10 years ago, and I was hired 10 years ago, soon after she became CEO, as we've rolled this out, we used to have a sustainability group over in government affairs and communication who really rolled this. And when I became chair of the sustainability agenda and the committee for the company, first thing I did was eliminate my job. First, for those of you who want to do it, put yourself out of a job. There should not be a sustainability office and then the operating business. Because then this is reputational, it's sort of policy engagement, all of which is critical, but it's not core to the business. So I'll give a very quick example so we're short on time. We have a CapEx approval process. Every business does. There's no CapEx that goes through PepsiCo now without a sign-off on the sustainability line. You can't buy a manufacturing machine or install equipment on production anywhere without the sustainability office signing off on it. It's not trading off. So you change your decision-making processes. You change your incentives. We have a board subcommittee called the Sustainability Committee of the Board of Directors. That's where it starts. The executive board of the company is the Sustainability Committee, by the way. I'm not it. R&D, of course, reports into me. Of course, there is no project starting in R&D without that lens because I'm accountable for both. It truly is embedding it organizationally. Now, on the outside, yeah, if you want to make money for the next 30 days, you could probably shut R&D down completely. You'd actually improve your bottom line. Probably do it for 60 days. Might even get away for 90 days. The question is, what are you investing? Pepsi's been in the business for 100 years. We hope to be in business 100 years from now. It is not, and I'll finish with this, I have no doubt in my mind there will be a food and beverage industry and an agricultural industry 100 years from now, so long as we have a viable planet. 90% of the world's foods are through the private sector. The question is not that. The question is which companies will have transformed themselves to be the food and beverage and agricultural companies of the future? And do we have the courage as leaders to transform ourselves while we're succeeding today?
Great. And that is what we've got to see. The company's got to do well to be able to work on these things, but unless it is embedded from the boardroom to the supply chain, where everybody in the leadership team is thinking about water, is thinking about human rights, is thinking about food resources, is thinking about climate change, it doesn't happen. A model, as we just heard Dr. Khan talk about, that makes sense. It's got to be embedded from the boardroom all the way through to the supply chain. You cannot stop and say our goals are just about what we could do at headquarters. You know, you may have a lot of paper you could recycle better, but their big footprint is out in the fields. It is in offices, it is around the world with supply chains, and taking on a holistic view of sustainability in a way that works for the company is the only option. And frankly, the only option where we're going to deal with the kind of extraordinary goals that have been set by the sustainability goals, but with the bold action, I actually listen and have hope that we could get there. Why don't we take some questions? Starting right here in the front, and then we'll go to the woman who's halfway up. So you're a second.
Thank you so much, both of you. Hi, my name is Maggie Dupree. I run a global community called the League of Intrapreneurs, so people inside organizations like PepsiCo innovating on the SDGs. And I have a question for you around the competencies and kind of cultural norm shifts that you see needing to deliver on the how. How are you thinking about new competencies? Are there gaps? And yeah, if you could talk about the kind of talent component of the how.
Yeah. So let me contextualize this and give you real examples. If you look at my executive team today, there is a direct report to my office. 100% of them were not at the company or in any of these roles when I came. It truly required either retraining people that were already in the company and infusing them with people from different industries. We had to bring people in. I mean, our lead for agriculture came from NASA. It's not the sort of person a food company would probably hire, right? My head of strategy came from Merck. Why? Because that was an industry I happened to come, who thinks about long-term development. Our industry talks about development on a 2-year cycle. The pharmaceutical industry thinks about a 10-year cycle. If we're going to do this, you have to change those time horizons. So those are examples. And by the way, for the women in the room, when I joined the company, 100% of my direct reports were male, Caucasian, and white. And the amazing thing was, as I looked at this audience, says, by the way, 60% of the shoppers that buy our products are women, and half of the world's population outside the US and Western Europe are people of color who buy our products. Sitting in New York and Chicago isn't going to cut it. And so today, more than half of my direct reports are women. Okay? And so you have to have the courage as a leader, not because, and I wasn't doing it because I got to count the diversity numbers. I completely disagree with that. I was doing it to say, until I have diversity of thought at the table, we're not going to transform. So the real answer to the question is, do you have the different perspectives at the table as a leader, and do you have the courage to listen to them? Those are the two things. It isn't good just to have them at the table, but do you have the courage to listen and then follow on? And that's what changed it.
Great. We'll go to you, but one quick, it doesn't hurt to have a woman named Indra Nooyi, who runs PepsiCo, the CEO, who is not a Caucasian white male,
And neither am I, by the way.
And who, like I was just going to say, our colleague here, they come from different places and have brought different thinking. And it shows.
Can I just add, look, I'm a second generation, okay? It's very important. My children look different, but they're Minnesota Vikings fans and are about as Midwestern as you can imagine, other than their suntan. So that doesn't bring diversity. You have to have diversity of perspective and thought. Just because you look different doesn't necessarily make you different.
Thanks for that. I appreciate that. This is Sunday Bridget Jones with the Rockefeller Foundation. I'm wondering, in the context of corporate benchmarking against the SDGs, what is the best incentive for companies relative to that? Is it ratings? Is it a different kind of engagement with companies to really follow the accountability relative to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals?
Yeah. It's not about ratings. Everything, the examples I've given you, for many of you who follow this, it probably is news. And yeah, we could do a lot better job at telling the story and all the rest of it. And frankly, I'll quickly move on. Sometimes I disagree with the way the ratings are done. I get asked the question, okay, Mehmood, in this rating checklist, who's your chief sustainability officer? And I go, we don't have one. And you go,
So you
ding.
get dinged.
You get dinged. But I'm not going to change that, because it's not about the rating. I really believe the chief sustainability officer is actually the executive board who makes the decisions on the operating side. And if they're not the sustainability officer, and I'm not the sustainability officer as the head of innovation and development of the business, then we're not going to change. Then it's ratings. So that's one. The second is, think about this. We're going to have a world with 2 to 3 billion more people on the planet. 70% of them are going to live in cities. That by 2050, 7 billion people will be living in cities. Those cities will not be occupied and populated by smallholder farmers. There'll be 7 billion consumers supported by 3 billion people in the rural world. If we don't figure this out, we cannot operationalize and grow as a business. It has nothing to do with rating. It's actually thinking through what is a viable operating model that will allow us to survive in a world where a city is 20 million people and you have to drop product from the perimeter through congested streets. Our current operating model was built on the fact that you could drive a truck down a highway from Dallas into Chicago in the same day. Today, it takes 8 hours to go from the perimeter of a megacity down to the center of the city and back in one day. And that's just 50 kilometers. Try driving in Mumbai, Shanghai, Sao Paulo, London, Manhattan. Pick your city, and you can't operate like that anymore. You're shipping air because most of a food package actually is air. And yet you can't, the solution isn't, well, I'll grow it locally. How do you grow locally in Mumbai or Shanghai or Calcutta or Manhattan? If you live in Manhattan with 3 million people, where are you growing your food? By the way, it's not going to happen just in vertical warehouses. Take a look outside. So do you understand? So this has to be core of your thinking about growing your business in a new way.
Now, what we're seeing with the hundreds of businesses, and we're advocates in working to push change, see bold goals set and actually executed. It's a number of things, and all the companies are different. It is their employees. Employees are saying, I want to work for a company that has a vision, a mission beyond just we're going to sell X amount of widgets. Every company is competing for the best and the brightest, and they are finding a motivating force for the present workforce, as well as who you're recruiting matters if you're a sustainability leader. Investors, we work with $13 trillion of investors with $13 trillion in assets under management, 130 institutional investors in money management. They're now saying, we want companies to be socially responsible and environmentally responsible. And they are prevailing on companies through their engagement to help see that change. Doesn't always happen. Reputational value to a company who has problems with their workforce or with wasting resources, having that called out in a newspaper is never a good thing. So there are multiple things beyond just most companies can't deal anymore. As we in the video we saw, if you're an insurance company, if we don't get a handle on climate change, we're going to see more storms. The 2 storms alone in the United States, we're talking about Texas and we're talking about Florida, are being discussed to cost us $200 billion. Well, that's going to happen and happen again and happen again. There is nothing about our economy that could deal with that in a way that's good. So connecting the drops, being bold and audacious, is not about separating these issues. They've got to be integrated into the core of what a company does, from the boardroom to the supply chain, and that's why Dr. Khan is here, that it is part of whether or not you will have a business in the future or not. Not enough resources, you can't run a company. So change is
Mindy,
happening.
May I ask you, look, you represent a very large investor base. Those investors, I mean, surely you're influencing and helping them understand, because that's how they've got to realize. And then they're going to come back to us. So what is it that you're telling them, other than these that said, hey, I will invest for that long term?
Well, we've developed the methodology and others to look at the real risks, climate risk, not just climate change, water risk. What is a PepsiCo without enough water? Not a viable business as far as I could tell. So we are doing the economic analysis, but as well working with the investors who could then, because they own shares in almost every one of publicly traded companies, and certainly many others, they are now looking at water risk and climate risk and diversity risk as part of their core analysis of a company. Is it enough? We're not quite there. But your story is exactly what we wanted to share here. It is about behavioral change. Companies weren't necessarily doing the kind of things and the stories we just heard. It is about bold and audacious goals, and it is about clarity and focus. And the Sustainable Development Goals, some may think are perfect, not. They address certainly some of society's greatest harms, whether or not my kids are going to have a future that makes sense. We're not going to get there without a more combined effort and, frankly, leadership from the private sector. I want to thank you. The leadership that you just talked about and that we're seeing every day gives me hope that we will get there.
We're in it together. We'll
Thanks very much.
Thank you.